am so happy that we're doing this show today because when Dotsie and I were preparing for it, we realized how little that we knew about diabetes, even though we know people who have diabetes. So I want to introduce our guest today. Firstly, Dr. Cyrus Khambatta was a senior at Stanford University when he was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes. For years, he followed what his doctor said and he cut his carb and raised his fat and protein intake. But he felt terrible. So he decided to learn for himself how to control his diabetes. He got his doctorate in nutritional biochemistry from Berkeley, and he got such great results from his own program that he started helping other diabetics. And then he met Robby Barbaro, who was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes at age 12. Robbie also felt terrible following the typical advice given by doctors. And by 17 years old, Robbie was eating a plant-based diet full of fruit. Robbie makes these amazing, fun, and really educational videos that show what he eats in a day, how much he exercises, and how much insulin he needs. And together, Robbie and Cyrus are helping hundreds of people to live vibrant, healthy lives with diabetes through their online coaching programs, their seminars, and their retreats through masteringdiabetes.org. So welcome, Cyrus and Robbie.
Thank you so much for having us. That's the best intro we've ever had, Cyrus.
Yeah, that's good. You should just end the podcast right here.
The end. You guys are awesome. No, we have so much amazing information. And Dotsie and I are so excited today. But first, I want to start off with just something really basic. Before we start talking about diabetes, because Dotsie and I realized how little we knew when we started discussing what diabetes is, can you tell us what is diabetes and what is the difference between type 1, type 1.5, type 2, prediabetes, that kind of thing? And I don't know, Cyrus, if you want to start with that.
Sure thing. No worries. Yeah, it's a common question that we get a lot. And there's actually a lot of confusion out in the sort of mainstream world of diabetes. So the way that it boils down is I'm going to say there's 5 different types of diabetes. There's type 1 diabetes, type 1.5 diabetes, pre-diabetes, type 2 diabetes, and then gestational diabetes. Okay, so those are the sort of like 5 classical forms of diabetes. And now over the past couple of years, there's a new form of diabetes called type 3 diabetes, which is actually Alzheimer's disease.
Wow.
And so they're referring to, there's a lot of research that's now showing that Alzheimer's disease is basically insulin resistance of your brain. And as that research matures, we might actually call Alzheimer's disease type 3 diabetes down the road. So point being is, without talking about Alzheimer's disease for the time being, just like you said, Robbie and I have been living with type 1 diabetes for a combined total of more than 30, I think it's been 31 years total between the two of us now. And what type 1 and type 1.5 diabetes is they are autoimmune conditions. So effectively, your own immune system has mistakenly targeted the cells in your pancreas that manufacture insulin. They're called beta cells. And so your immune system attacks the beta cells and it kills the population of beta cells, and it brings them down to such a small number that the amount of insulin that they're producing is no longer sufficient. And so as a result of that, you go into an insulin deficient state, and then it makes us reliant on having to inject insulin from the outside world in order to eat, in order to live, in order to, continue to, breathe and live a normal functioning life. So those are the autoimmune versions. Now, the difference between type 1 and 1.5 is that type 1 usually happens when you're under the age of 30, and it's a relatively strong reaction, and you end up going to full insulin dependence relatively quickly, within the span of 6 months, 12 months, sometimes as much as 18 months at the most. Type 1.5 diabetes is an autoimmune version that affects adults that are over the age of 30, and it's a weaker, slower progressing autoimmune reaction. So there's this whole new, there's a whole large collection of adults that are now developing autoimmune diabetes at the age of 35, 40, 60, 65, 70 years old. Wow. And it's actually not type 2 diabetes. This is autoimmune version. And the prevalence of type 1.5 diabetes is now going up and up and up.
Type 2 diabetes adult onset, but now they just call it type 2 because it sounds like type 1 is sometimes an adult onset diabetes also.
That's exactly right. You hit it on the head. So not only is like type 1.5 now becoming more adult onset, but you also have type 2 diabetes, which is becoming more child onset at the same time. And so the two of them, they used to be kind of separated in time, but now they're sort of like, this Venn diagram is like there's an overlap between the two of them. So that brings us to prediabetes and type 2 diabetes. So prediabetes and type 2 diabetes are considered lifestyle versions of diabetes. And effectively what happens is that you consume a diet that is too high in fat. And over the course of time, as your diet is high in fat, what ends up happening is that you end up depositing fat in tissue, in adipose tissue, which is your fat tissue, which is stored all over your body, right? You got adipose tissue in your butt, you got it in your abdomen, you got it in your neck, it's in your face, it's everywhere, right? And at the same time, not only is fat stored in your adipose tissue where it actually belongs, but fat is also deposited into your muscle tissue. It's put inside of your deltoids, it's put inside of your chest, it's put in your quadriceps. And it also goes into your liver.
Is this normal for everyone to have fat in their muscles, or is this just if you're overweight that you have it in your muscles and your liver?
It's a great question. Your muscles are actually designed, your muscle and liver are actually designed to store small amounts of fat. And they store it as a molecule called triglyceride. And so small amounts of triglyceride are not only physiologically normal, but they're actually required for normal optimal functioning. The problem is that the standard American diet, the ketogenic diet, the low carbohydrate diet, these are all sort of higher in fat than what is considered physiologically normal. And as a result of that, over the course of time, that small amount of triglyceride, which is supposed to be only a tiny, a small amount of energy inside of every cell, it starts to grow and grow and grow and grow and grow over the course of time. So now as that lipid droplet gets larger and larger inside of tissues inside of your muscle and inside of your liver, then those two tissues mount a self-defense mechanism, and the self-defense mechanism is called insulin resistance. And so effectively what these two tissues are doing is they're basically saying, hold on, stop the show. There's so much fat that's coming inside of me that I actually cannot block from coming in, because there's very weak cellular mechanisms for these tissues to block this fat from coming in. So, every time you eat eggs and fish and bacon and avocados and olive oil, there's more and more and more fat coming into your mouth, and then therefore more and more fat getting deposited inside of your muscle, inside of your liver. So these two tissues can't necessarily block more fat from coming in, but what they can do is they can block glucose from coming in. And so they're basically saying, hey, I'm done. I don't want any more energy inside of me. So what they do in order to block glucose is they block insulin, because insulin is required in order to get glucose inside of the tissues. So they mount this condition called insulin resistance, where they basically are like, all right, insulin receptors, stop. And they pull them back in, and these insulin receptors become less functional, they become less numerous. And as a result of that, the next time you try and eat a banana or a bowl of quinoa or a plate of rice, something that has carbohydrate energy in it, that carbohydrate is broken down into glucose. The glucose and the insulin circulate through your blood. Insulin knocks on the door and says, hey, I got some glucose. Do you want to take it up? And these tissues are like, no, 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 no. I got all this fat. I got to get rid of all this triglyceride first. And so it's basically what the muscle and liver are doing is trying to prioritize the usage of that fatty acid before it gets bigger and bigger. So this is the problem with, this is what type 2 diabetes is. This is what prediabetes is.
Can I just recap as a layperson? So you're telling me that type 1 and type 1.5 have to do with the pancreas not being able to produce insulin, but type 2 has to do with the muscles and liver not being able to accept insulin. And so therefore all the sugar ends up in your body, and then your blood sugar goes up. The one thing, Dotsie, was there something that surprised you? Because what he said was, when I asked him, when he talked about what diabetes is a result of, is too much fat. I had always thought it was too much sugar in the diet. Full disclosure, I eat a lot of sugar.
She's a sugar addict.
Yes, I am. And it's quite serious, actually. And my friend who's a doctor once said to me very seriously, and it scared me, she said, if you continue eating so much sugar, you are going to get diabetes. And I'm hearing from you, because I don't eat a lot of fat, that might not be the case.
Okay, so you bring up a phenomenal point, and you bring up probably the number one question in all of the diabetes world, which is, I thought diabetes had everything to do with sugar, and now you're telling me it has something to do with fat? This doesn't make any sense, right? Okay, so let's be very transparent about this whole thing. When we're talking about sugar, okay, there's effectively two types of sugar, okay? There's refined sugar that comes from packaged and processed products, you see it as table sugar, high fructose corn syrup, mannitol, sorbitol, dextrose, you name it. Okay. Then there's natural sugar, or what we like to call carbohydrate. Okay. So when you eat an apple or a mango or a banana, okay, these foods, these whole foods actually have long chain and short chain carbohydrates. And these carbohydrates are broken down into what we call sugar molecules. So in reality, the thing that confuses people is that we're using the same word, sugar, to describe two completely separate things. And it becomes very confusing. So in reality, what we should refer to as, we got refined sugar and carbohydrate from whole foods. Okay. So point being, if you eat a diet,
and would that be
that
complex carbohydrates? So not simple carbohydrates.
That's exactly
it would be
right.
Simple
so
sugars
the term,
and complex.
Yeah. So complex basically refers to like the length of the carbohydrate chain. So if you're eating a potato as an example, the length of carbohydrate chains are longer and therefore they take more time to break down. And if you're eating fruits, you get longer ones, but you also get shorter ones, and therefore they are more rapidly degraded and more rapidly absorbed. So you're absolutely right. So effectively, when you're eating a diet that's high in refined sugar, okay, refined sugar causes insulin resistance as well. Okay, refined sugar ends up overwhelming your liver with too much simple sugars, and as a result of that, your liver basically takes it in and it goes, "Oh my God, what is this stuff? This stuff came in really quickly. It took very little time for it to get inside of the blood, and there's so much of it that now I can only do one thing, and it converts it into fatty acids, and then throws those fatty acids back into your blood, and now you have a lot of fat inside of your blood as well." So what I'm trying to say here is that diets that are high in refined sugar can also contribute to insulin resistance and diabetes. There's no question about it. But diets that are high in whole carbohydrate from whole plant foods do not contribute to prediabetes and type 2 diabetes. In fact, they reverse prediabetes and type 2 diabetes because they are complex packets of information, effectively is what they are, that contains carbohydrate, fat, protein, fiber, water, vitamins, minerals, antioxidants, phytochemicals. So they're very complex three-dimensional structures that take a lot of time to process. And that time is actually a good thing because it allows your metabolism to sort of slowly pull out the necessary components and distribute those components as necessary, instead of having a tablespoon of sugar, which then gets into your blood really quickly and then overwhelms your liver. Does that make sense?
If you're binging on sugar, we most likely would binge on donuts, not sweet potatoes.
Yeah,
I mean,
so
exactly.
she was correct. So she was correct, darn it. Luckily, I'm not eating donuts. So, Robbie, thank you so much, Cyrus, for that explanation. That was really educational. Robbie, tell us how you were diagnosed with type 1 diabetes at age 12 in the first place.
Yeah, so my older brother also has type 1 diabetes. And for several weeks prior to my official diagnosis, I was complaining to my mom. I was saying, I'm thirsty all the time. I'm going to the bathroom all the time. I think I have diabetes like Steve. And she's like, no, don't be silly. You don't have diabetes. And eventually she was out of town. We were living in Minnesota at the time. My mom and dad were in Florida looking at homes because we were going to move there. And she called me and was checking in. I said, Mom, I couldn't sleep last night. I was cramping. She says, okay, go upstairs, use your brother's blood glucose meter and test yourself. And I was well above 400. And you're supposed to be between 80 and 130. Wow. So my brother said right there, you have type 1 diabetes, pack your bags. You're going to be in the hospital for a few nights. So we went to the regular doctor, got a quick checkup, and then I don't even know what test they ran, but they said, yep, you have type 1. And I remember my brother in the room, he was crying and just being like, oh, I'm so sorry you have to deal with this. It's the first time I've ever seen him cry. And that was it. And my parents flew back and they said, look, don't worry about it. It's just an inconvenience. You can still do whatever you want in life. And that's the way I've dealt with it for the past 18 years.
And after you were diagnosed, what kind of regimen did the doctors tell you to follow?
Yeah, so my parents wanted to make sure I had the best healthcare possible. So we were living in Minnesota, and they would drive me and my older brother to Rochester to go to the Mayo Clinic. And it was just typical standard American diet. So I got to see a psychologist, I saw the endocrinologist, I saw a nutritionist. They have this whole camp of people trying to help you out. And unfortunately, their goal was to try and make me feel normal. which I think is a mistake. I think it's a great opportunity when somebody gets diagnosed with a condition like this to raise awareness. Hey, now it's time to really take care of yourself. Now you can improve your health. And in
Better than
hindsight,
normal.
Exactly. Cyrus and I both feel this way. Our health is better because of this diagnosis.
And so what would they tell you to eat? What is the standard thing that both Cyrus and Robbie, you were told to do when you first were diagnosed by conventional doctors?
Yeah, so I mean, the standard is, for me at that time, as an adolescent being diagnosed with type 1, it was just standard American diet. It wasn't even like, go low carb or anything like that. It was just, hey, just eat like your friends. Don't worry about it. Just inject insulin and you're good. Just count your carbohydrates.
So
eventually, as you start learning more and more on my own, start reading books. Then in the alternative community, people trying to really move the needle, the leading teachings right now is do a low carbohydrate diet, and that's what I ended up trying, and that did not work out.
And sorry, go ahead.
No, it just sort of, it's obviously really typical in the medical space there, in the practice of helping with disease when you're already sick, not prevention. So that's what we get kind of across the board. Anyway, I have a question, but Cyrus is joining us from Costa Rica, and I miss Costa Rica, and I just want to know if those are howler monkeys that we're hearing in the background, because I feel like I hear, which is awesome, and I just want to hear them more. Is that what? Because I want people to know, like, wow, where's that coming from? So enjoy that. I really miss hearing them.
Oh, that's great.
I wanted to just push the rewind button for a second on type 1 diabetes. Cyrus, you had said that nowadays people, I mean, it's autoimmune based. And there's people that are coming with type 1 diabetes in their 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s. What is happening in our biology that this is the case?
It's a phenomenal question. The truth is that nobody knows the answer to that question. And there are a lot of hypotheses from the scientific world that have been tested and seem to be linked to type 1 diabetes, formation. But there's no smoking gun, this is the reason why people are developing type 1 diabetes. However, the things that we know do contribute to type 1 diabetes are, number one, there are certain types of viruses that you can contract that can actually affect your immune system in a way where your immune system goes and gets tricked into believing that there are specific proteins on the beta cells that need to be targeted for destruction. So a virus can cause it. There's also, as far as our food is concerned, there's two leading theories about what could potentially cause type 1 diabetes. One of them is cow's milk, believe it or not. And there are proteins inside of cow's milk that are very similar in their amino acid sequence to some of the proteins that are on the surface of the beta cells inside of your pancreas. So what ends up happening is that you consume milk at a young age, and you consume a good amount of it, as we were all told, because it was the 80s and it was cool, and we saw billboards of Andre Agassi drinking milk, and so that's what we did, right? And so over the course of time, the more milk you drink, what ends up happening is that it causes gut permeability. In other words, there are microscopic holes in the lining of your gut that actually get caused as a result of inflammatory molecules coming through your gut at all times. And so some of the, when proteins come into your gut, they're supposed to get chopped into individual amino acids, or sometimes 2 or sometimes 3 at the most. But what ends up happening is when you have these holes that are like perforations inside of your gut, then amino acid chains can end up escaping into your bloodstream when they're larger than 3 amino acids. So they can be 4, 5, 7, 10, 15, 20 amino acids long. So now you have these foreign amino acid chains that are inside of your blood where they're not supposed to be. And your immune system takes a look at it and says, what is that? I did not make that. Kill that protein immediately. Yeah. So your immune system basically mounts an attack, and it creates antibodies that are specifically designed to degrade those non-human amino acid chains. The problem is that when those amino acid chains are very similar to amino acid chains that are inside of your body, then your immune system can easily get tricked. And it's this process called molecular mimicry, where your immune system says, oh, hey, look, that's a non-human amino acid chain, kill that. And then it goes and finds another one, which is so similar, maybe it's only different by 1 amino acid, and then starts to kill that one as well. And if those amino acid chains happen to be on the surface of a beta cell, goodbye beta cell.
So that's what kills the cells.
That's one of the theories as to what could potentially be contributing to type 1 diabetes. And then there's one other thing that I'll talk about real quickly called MAP, which is called Mycobacterium avium paratuberculosis. It's a long word, don't remember that. All it is basically it's a bacteria that's found in the gut of ruminants. So basically these are like land grazing cows, right? So in these industrial farms, when MAP gets inside of the gut of these animals, it can actually kill the animal. So MAP is in some of these animals because some of these animals are diseased. When they poop, the MAP is in their fecal matter. It gets on the boots of the workers. It gets on the gloves of the workers. Then when they go to actually slaughter these animals, the MAP ends up inside of the meat and it ends up inside of the milk. And some of this MAP can be resistant to pasteurization. And so when you go to the grocery store, you're buying meat and you're buying milk that actually has MAP in it. And then when you consume it, the MAP can actually be causational in type 1 diabetes through a similar process as I just described.
You're saying that dairy and meat are two big reasons why people get diabetic, when we all thought, I'll speak for myself, I thought it was just sugar. And now you're bringing in two other very strong reasons why kids or babies get type 1 diabetes, and then kids, and now adults. Is that why it's what Dotsie
Yeah,
asked?
exactly right. So here's the what you're hitting on here, I think, is very important, which is that, like I said before, milk can be is associated with an increased risk for type 1 diabetes. Meat is associated with an increased risk for type 1 diabetes. Both of those foods are also associated with an increased risk for prediabetes and type 2 diabetes as well. But not for the molecular mimicry reasons, basically because they're high in saturated fat, and saturated fat contributes to insulin resistance, like we talked about, which can then progress into type 2 diabetes state, where eating carbohydrate-rich anything becomes a huge problem.
We talked about Robbie's origin story. Cyrus, you also were diagnosed when you were at Stanford, and then you felt terrible on what the doctors were telling you to do. Can you tell us a little bit about that and what you discovered, a way that worked for you, and basically was the genesis of your nutritional coaching for diabetics and for your company that you have with Robbie?
That's exactly right. So I was 22. I was going to Stanford University at the time. I was a senior, and all of a sudden I felt terrible. I mean, I had very similar symptoms to what Robbie had described. I was thirsty all the time. I had no energy, and I was driving myself crazy because I would just try and study, and then I would take a sip of water, and then I would try and study some more, and I was like, wow, I'm getting thirstier. So I'll take another sip, and then I would drink, and I was like, I am getting thirstier every minute of the day. This doesn't make any sense. And so I called my sister, who's a doctor of osteopathy, and I said, hey, Shanaz, I have these symptoms. Can you please explain it to me? And she started crying. Like she's keeps herself together a lot of the time. She started crying immediately. She said, go straight to the health center. You have type 1 diabetes. So at that time, I'm thinking, type 1 diabetes? Like, I don't have diabetes, Shanaz. And she goes, I don't have time to explain, but just go. And at that time, I was very ignorant. I thought diabetes had something to do with old people and cake. That's it. Right? So here I am, like,
which it may, but that's not the entire story.
So neither of those applied to me. So long story short, I ended up going to the hospital. I ended up, they checked my blood glucose. It was in the 600s, 6 times higher than it needed to be. And then 24 hours later, I was discharged with a blood glucose meter, a prescription for insulin, test strips, a life alert bracelet, and a carbohydrate counting guide. And I returned to my dorm room and I was like, you have got to be kidding me. I just turned into a medical patient overnight. This doesn't make any sense. So the doctors at that time told me that the only way to live with type 1 diabetes was to eat a low carbohydrate diet, because that's all that they knew at that time. And that information is still being passed around even today. And so I tried to limit my carbohydrate intake. I tried to bring it down to like 75, maybe 100, 125 grams a day. But, I'm an athlete and I love to play soccer and I love to go to the gym and lift weights. And I got to say, when I'm sitting there eating turkey burgers for breakfast and eggs for lunch and ham and cheese for dinner, I didn't have very much energy. And I noticed that my muscles were hurting, my joints were hurting, and my blood glucose was a freaking nightmare. And so, a year into this process, I decided, okay, I got to make a change because clearly this is not working for me. And then I started looking up things on the internet, and I came across this guy whose name was Dr. Doug Graham. And Dr. Doug Graham was holding a retreat, and he teaches people how to eat a raw food diet. So I said, hey, Doug, if you can help me, I'm all ears. And he said, Cyrus, just come over here. I'm about to blow your mind. So I said, great. I love the confidence. So I go to his retreat. Within a week, I dropped my insulin use by 40% in 7 days. But here's the kicker. My carbohydrate intake went from 125 grams to 650 grams per day. So I effectively 5-tupled my carbohydrate intake, and I cut my insulin use by 40%.
Wow.
So the two of them were going in opposite
And just
directions.
to be clear, again, for people, those are complex, whole food, fiber-rich, complex carbohydrates. So throw out some foods. What were you eating? What filled up those 600 grams?
Mangoes, grapes, bananas, plantains, tomatoes, zucchini, pineapples. This is a raw food experience because that's what Doug Graham taught me how to do. So we're not eating sweet potatoes. We're not eating quinoa and brown rice. So, any fruit you can think of, any vegetable you can think of, boom, put it in my mouth. It was great.
Low fat, right?
Yes, very low fat. So Doug Graham went on to write a book called the 80-10-10 diet. So he basically is saying the optimal diet for human beings is 80% carbohydrate, 10% fat, 10% protein.
And how did you? Sorry.
And he comes at it from a raw food perspective.
Okay.
But point being is that the raw food diet that he put us on had those macronutrient profiles.
So both of you eat a high carb, low fat diet. Can you tell us a little bit? And I'm assuming that's what you recommend for your clients who have diabetes or pre-diabetes, types 1, 2, etc.
Yes.
Can you talk to us a little bit about your philosophy and how it works for you? Raw, plants, what? And then I want to. I have so many questions.
Yeah, we have a very simple program. We literally have broken it down into green light, yellow light, and red light foods.
Like
All
Dr.
right?
Greger.
Exactly. It's so simple. And for the green light foods are fruits, starchy vegetables, beans, peas, and lentils. Then you have intact whole grains, non-starchy vegetables, and leafy greens. And there's herbs and spices. Okay. All those foods, people on our program can literally eat as much as they want until they're satisfied. They do
Cooked
not-
and unraw.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
You do not need to limit them. It's totally their choice, whatever version they want to do. It's a low-fat, plant-based, whole food diet. You can get your calories from fruit. You can get your calories from potatoes. You can get your calories from beans, quinoa, oats, all that stuff. Then it's specifically listed. So we fruits, starchy vegetables, then the beans, legumes, that category, and then intact whole grains. Those 4 foods. I want to focus on those because people need to eat enough calories. A lot of times people switch to a plant-based diet and they don't eat enough. Then they get hungry. They go and eat a cheeseburger or something and they feel better. It wasn't the plant-based diet. It was that they weren't eating enough food. So the green light category, we list those foods at the top because you have to focus on those. You can't sit down and just focus on lettuce. You got to have calorie-dense plant-based foods. So that's the green light category. Then the yellow light category, these are foods that are still healthy. They're good, but we want people to be careful with these. So this includes nuts and seeds, avocado, coconut meat, and olives. Those are the whole, higher fat plant-based foods that people must be careful with if they want to maximize their insulin sensitivity and avoid all the problems Cyrus was talking about by eating too much fat. All right. Then we have things like pastas. They're a little bit more processed. Those are going to be in the yellow light category as well. And things like bread. So whatever the bread was originally made out of, that's going to be in the green light category. Eat like whole millet, not millet bread. That's ideal. But look, there's still room for millet bread in the healthy program here. It's just not a green light food to eat unlimited amounts of. Then the red light category, that's where we put all animal products, all refined processed foods, and oil is in the red light category. These are foods we suggest people do not eat at all if they want to maximize their insulin sensitivity.
Now, but you're eating a lot of insulin producing foods, right? No?
No.
The fruit.
No.
You guys eat 700.
No.
I've seen what you eat in a day, and we're going to talk about that.
So if that was, Cyrus, I'd love you to explain this because there's not just people that have diabetes that have an extreme, intense fear of fruit. Everybody that's on paleo, everybody that's on keto, they are literally in fear of eating an apple. So explain
100%.
what happens, maybe the difference between an apple and apple juice, for example.
Okay. So this is another one of those. It's like nutritional folklore that I just get so frustrated by. But if you're taking a look at something like apple versus apple juice, okay, in order to take an apple and turn it into apple juice, you run it through a juicer, and what the juicer does is it basically keeps all the fiber back. Okay, it basically separates the fiber from the juice, and then you end up with a liquid that is sweet, right? If you're eating the apple, like I was alluding to before, when you eat an apple, you're getting thousands of nutrients at the same time. But the nutrients that we have classified as scientists and know a lot about are called carbohydrate, fat, and protein. Those are your three macronutrients. Okay? And then we have the micronutrients on top of that: vitamins, fiber, minerals, water, antioxidants, and phytochemicals. Okay? So the macronutrients, a simple way to think about this is that the macronutrients, the carbohydrate, the fat, and the protein, are protected by the micronutrients. And I say protected by because the micronutrients are actually instruction manuals. And their job is, as soon as they go inside of your digestive system, these are very small, non-calorie containing components of the food whose job is to help and assist in thousands of biochemical reactions that are either involved in breaking down the food or absorbing the food or transporting the food or putting the nutrients into tissues. Okay? Without those micronutrients, the macronutrients become dangerous. Okay? And this is something that's really sort of misunderstood because people are always talking about macronutrients. Where do you get your carbs? Where do you get your fat? Where do you get your protein? But people are not talking about whole food. Exactly. This reductionist philosophy where I'm just going to talk about one nutrient and focus on that one nutrient, as opposed to talking about a complex three-dimensional structure that is so complex that modern science will never figure it out, absolutely never figure it out. But we as scientists are taking stabs at it, and we do know some things about it, which is that these micronutrients are actually quite protective and helpful in orchestrating this sort of like biochemical symphony.
So Michael, who is a meat eater and he drinks a lot of milk, has a question.
We love you, Michael.
We love him, but we're going to make him into a vegan by the end of this few episodes. Go ahead, Michael.
Well, I think the thing that is interesting for me is that I'm 42 years old. I'm 6'1". In my prime, when I was an athlete working out and playing all of the sports, I was at about 180 pounds muscle, very, very little fat. And now that I'm older and, have stopped playing sports regularly and even have no workout regimen to speak of at this current point in my life, I'm going to change that. It's something I'm working on right now. Here's my diet, and this is going to disappoint everybody in this room and everybody probably who's listening to this right now. I have a business I run where I burn, the candle at both ends here, and I'm up really early in the morning to get here to start working, and I leave my work probably around 11 or 12 o'clock at night, and I do the same thing again. In that process, I might find myself not having breakfast, not having a lunch. And then when I get home, I look in my refrigerator and all I have is meat. Maybe it's a skirt steak, piece of meat, or some chicken. I'll literally will fry that up, and I will eat the whole steak with the fat. And I mean, if it has a bone, I'll try to consume the bone almost. You know what I mean? And okay. And I'm also, this is horrible to say, but it's the truth. I might be consuming a half a bottle to a full bottle of Cabernet wine.
Holy God. Wait a second. Okay, so Michael, what's your question?
No, I'm just giving you sort of the truth about my diet.
Here. Okay,
my
so
diet
why are you
really
still alive?
awful.
Is that what? Okay.
Well, and that is where I'm trying to come to at this point, because I look at a lot of you guys who are, have gotten diabetes early on in your lives, and you look extremely fit, you look extremely healthy, more so than me. I'm about 220 pounds right now. Mostly, I would say, if I was to speculate, the wine consumption, other alcohols, the sugars in that. But I literally have this, what I would reference as an awful diet, and I'm not at all remotely close to having diabetes or any, I don't have, you know, I am not experiencing
What's your
some of this.
cholesterol level? Do you know?
I don't know currently,
Oh.
but in the past, I've been on the level where I'm supposed to be. I go to the doctor, and the doctor says that, you know, I'm doing well, and
But that's the
all places.
conventional doctor. Let's hear
Sure
from.
enough.
All right, we're gonna
Sure
land the
enough.
plane.
But I
Did you-
just gave you this breakdown to understand my history, and also why is it that I'm not diabetic?
It's a great question. It's a great question. Michael, I love you, but you're a ticking time bomb.
I know.
You really are. Okay. What you're doing is effectively what a lot of people are doing, which is you're doing like a 16-hour fast or more, maybe even a 20-hour fast with a small feeding window. Okay. So it's a form of intermittent fasting where it's either a 16-8 or maybe a 24. And basically what that means is that you're not eating for majority of the day, and then you're eating for a small window during that day. And what a lot of people do is, like, intermittent fasting is known to be very effective for actually increasing longevity. We've known this in every single species ever studied up to this point. Yeast, worms, flies, monkeys, dogs, pigs, sheep, you name it. And now even human beings are being tested. And it improves your metabolic health, no questions asked. But people in the ketogenic community are now taking it one step further, and they're saying, okay, well, during that 4-hour window, I'm going to eat a low carbohydrate diet. I'm going to eat steak. I'm going to eat chicken. I'm going to eat fish. I'm going to eat eggs. And that's going to prevent me from getting diabetes as well. And it'll be a double whammy. But in reality, the diet that you're eating, even though you don't necessarily have diabetes at this point, maybe you don't have cancer, you don't have hypertension, you don't have high cholesterol, you don't have Alzheimer's disease. Now, that may not be the case 5, 10, 15 years from now. Okay? The diet that you're eating right now is increasing your cardiovascular disease risk. It's increasing your risk for insulin resistance and diabetes. It's increasing your risk for chronic diseases. And even though you're not manifesting any of them right now, doesn't necessarily mean that into the future you won't display any of these. I hope that you won't personally, but your diet suggests that you will. And secondarily, your diet is not consistent with longevity. And what that means is that if you were eating a diet that was more nutrient dense, that was lower in fat, that was lower in saturated fat, that had less animal protein in it, you could actually potentially live a longer number of years on this planet. And until you get to that point, you will never even know how good it might actually
And
make
can
you
I
feel.
also bring up something that Michael started off with, which a lot of people, I'm sure, Dotsie, you all hear this from your clients. I don't have a lot of time. But when I watch you two talk about your diet, Robbie, I'd like to talk about what you eat in a day, because it does not seem to take a lot of time. And I know it's not a diet that you necessarily say your clients have to follow, because you eat a more strict.
Fruit-based.
He's fruit-based, but tell us a little bit about what you eat, and so Michael can have an idea of how easy it can be to eat like you. And then I know Cyrus eats a lot like you, but he adds a little more hemp protein and stuff in. So let's
Yes.
talk about what y'all eat so that people can understand.
Absolutely. So my diet personally is, like I was saying, fruit-based. I eat fruit for breakfast.
Tell us how much. Tell us what.
Yeah. So like Cyrus was saying, we're both eating, somewhere between 600, 700, 800 grams of carbohydrate per day. And so breakfast is going to be, 3 large mangoes and, maybe a couple kiwis or some papaya, a huge plate. What people think is a serving bowl for a bunch of people, that's just my bowl. But I also like to add in some veggies to that. So add some greens, I'll add some zucchini, some cucumber, stuff like that. And that sort of, for a person living with type 1, helps me manage my blood glucose curve. So adding, and that can be very helpful for people who are just starting this diet, who are very insulin resistant and want to see their numbers improve quickly. We can, through our coaching practice, we can micromanage that to a certain extent. We can help them. And adding greens and non-starchy vegetables, and also beans in some cases, if people want to add that, that helps lower the glucose curve. It doesn't go as high, and it's healthy. So yeah, I literally eat fruits and greens. Like, that's basically my diet. And so lunch is going to be another huge bowl of fruit. I'm going to be eating 800, 900,000 calories worth of fruit for lunch. And then I have a little snack before dinner, a little pre-dinner. I usually do wild blueberries and mangoes, something our friend Adam said. We both love that combo. And then dinner's a big salad. So lots of greens, maybe some carrots, maybe some more zucchini, squashes, like yellow squash, stuff like that, summer squash, and more fruit.
So people are asking where you're getting your protein and how do you...
Yeah, so the fruit protein comes from mostly the fruit, because that's where my calories are coming from, and then also from the greens. And personally, my protein is like, 6 or 7% of calories from protein without adding any protein powders, any high protein foods. It just comes from the whole fruits and greens that I eat. And it's plenty of protein. I've been doing this for over 11 years now.
That's the RDA, isn't it? 6 to 7% of calories if you're eating enough calories. Isn't that the...
It's somewhere around there.
And it's important to remember that everything that is alive has protein. So all of those fruits are alive. And I was shocked to learn, I was one of the people that I didn't even think it had any protein, any fruit. Lemons are 16% protein. There you go. It's so with all of that. So
it's
I just
in all
have to,
Whole Foods.
Yes.
Again, it's just
we're too obsessed with it. That's why I'm asking that question, because I know that's what our listeners are asking. I'm glad you did.
It's a core teaching of our program is you do not need to micromanage your nutrition. If anybody's going to read any book on this topic, read the book Whole by Colin Campbell, and you'll understand there's this symphony of nutrition. You just do not need to worry about micronutrients. When you eat enough calories of whole plant foods, you're going to meet your needs.
The key being whole plant foods. Cyrus, can you tell us what you eat and what you recommend for your client? Well, you've already went through the green light, so let's hear what you eat in a day.
Yeah, so I eat very similar to Robbie, actually. Like I said, Robbie and I both got trained by Dr. Doug Graham back in the day. So we were both trained under the same 80-10-10 philosophy, purely raw food, fruit-based, no questions. Over the past couple of years, I've decided to put a little bit more cooked food into my diet. And so now I got quinoa in my diet. Every so often, I'll put some beans into my diet. And like you mentioned earlier, I do add a hemp protein powder because I love to exercise. And I find that it helps me recover from exercise just a little bit quicker and perform a little bit better. So, but the overall philosophy, just like Robbie described, is that I'm eating every single thing that goes into my body comes from a whole plant, no questions asked. Nothing that comes from a package, nothing that comes from a bottle. And there's obviously no animal products in my diet at all. And by doing it that way, it's not only does it maximize your insulin sensitivity, which effectively means that it allows you to eat large amounts of carbohydrate energy for small amounts of insulin. It just flat out gives me tons of energy, which I'm sure you guys can probably also vouch for. Don't let me put words in your mouth, but it gives me plenty of energy. And the thing that I love about this also is that I can be as active as I want to be. Back in the day, that wasn't the case. When I was eating a meat-based diet, when I had a lot of meat and cheese in my diet, I felt like there was this sort of like I would go and I'd work out and I would get tired like relatively quickly. And I'd be like, okay, well, I guess that's all my body can handle. And now, don't get me wrong, I still get tired. I still get fatigued, but much later in the process. I can push a lot harder. I can go for a lot longer period of time and I can recover way faster. And I wouldn't trade that for the world.
What were you thinking when you heard what they were eating?
Well, I mean, I am a fan of fruit. I'm not afraid of fruit. In fact, I have been encouraging more fruit in my diet. Blueberries I'm in love with. I'm eating, apples and, I'm a big avocado guy as far as vegetables. I just, it's the preparation, I think, ultimately for me. And I know that sounds lazy, but
let me help you out here for a second.
Yeah, let Robbie, because he deals with people like you.
Truly, honestly, at the end of the day, if you shoot, it's like, I want to eat healthier, there's no excuses in 2018. There are very easy packaged products available at Whole Foods that are healthy, clean Engine 2 products. There's a company called Tabachnik who has soups. You go to Whole Foods, they have, or any grocery store
I've
these
been
days.
buying the pineapple, sliced pineapple.
Yeah, this thing's already sliced.
Yeah.
I mean, when it comes time to cook, but you go to any grocery store these days, they have the celery's already chopped up, the squash is already chopped up, the zucchini's already spiralized. Like, it's not that hard. Mm-hmm. And you can batch cook once on the weekend. Mm-hmm. You can cook all the quinoa you need for the entire week, all the beans you need for the entire week. You can literally take a potato and put it in the microwave. Yeah. And you can add a sauce on top.
I just recently bought asparagus and some other vegetables, and what my problem is too is that I don't get to them because of my workload and my timing, and that's on me.
Yeah.
But wait, you
totally
get to
understand.
the meat though, so I'm not
because
clear why you don't get to the asparagus.
Because I want to put the asparagus in the oven. I need to prep and start cooking that before I cook the meat. And the meat I can cook the meat quickly at high heat and get it done, and then put it in my stomach faster. It's my fault. I'm a jerk.
No, you're not a jerk. We're all on a journey, Michael.
But at the end of the day, I'm just being real to the routine, and I am trying to be better, and I am going after those already chopped things. I mean, that's something that I'm definitely dealing with, but it's just tough.
I believe in you, man.
Yeah, I appreciate it.
And Cyrus and Robbie, you deal with these kind of people all the time in your Mastering Diabetes seminars, I'm sure, who have to make radical changes in their diet. Go from what Michael eats to a whole food plant-based diet. That's.
Can you guys tell us where everyone can find you, where people can find you? We could do another whole 45 minutes. We'll definitely have you back multiple times because this needs to continue. But I don't want to leave people with not knowing where they can find you, social media, website, books, tell them everything.
Oh, yeah. And I just really recommend the videos that Robbie does showing what he eats in a day. And then Cyrus also talking about how much insulin. I mean, we see you inject your insulin, then see your delicious meals. So, yeah, everybody needs to watch these.
Absolutely. The best place to find us is to go to our website, masteringdiabetes.org. In the upper right corner, there's a Get Started button, and people will get a quick start guide for reversing insulin resistance. That's the best place to get started. And then you can also find us on social media. We're on Facebook, we're on YouTube, we're on Instagram. It's at Mastering Diabetes for our page. And then we have our personal profiles at Mindful Diabetic Robbie for me and at Mango Man Nutrition for Cyrus.
Mango Man?
That's right. This
Nutrition.
is the Mango Man.
Okay,
He's the official Mango
He's the
Man.
Mango Man. But it's Robbie who gave us these mangoes.
Yeah.
So
We're going to give them to Michael, though. I think we need to share.
I think it's brilliant.
Thank you both so much, really. Thank you, Robbie, for coming in, and thank you, Cyrus, for hooking in with us from Costa Rica. We really appreciate it.
Well, thank you to you guys, actually, because I love the fact that you guys are, you've been infected with the, plant-based, whole food, plant-based feeling, and you're trying to pass on the message to more people. Thank you for doing what you do. We're trying to do the exact same thing with a diabetes spin on it. And I know that this podcast is going to affect millions of people. So we really appreciate you considering us to
Cyrus,
be here.
will you go to the window behind you when we hang up and blow the howler monkeys kisses for me? I miss them and I love listening to them. I can barely focus.
Absolutely will.
Thank you.
Thank you, Cyrus.
You guys are awesome.
Thank you.
All right. Till next time.
So thank you so much for tuning in today. If we helped you in any way, then click the subscribe button and let's keep hanging out together. We have so much more to share with you.
And if you need more information on actually making the switch for good, please visit us at switchforgood.org for loads of info. And you can subscribe to our mailing list where you will receive all sorts of super cool gifts, discount codes to our very fave dairy-free products, and a lifetime of powerful health tips.
So join us on the journey to switch for good. This is the future.